Welcome to our exciting episodes on nuclear. It is the largest country in the world, with its internationally recognized territory covering 17,098,246 square kilometers, 6,601,670 square miles, and encompassing one-eighth of Earth's inhabitable landmass. Being the largest country, Russia also has the most powerful nuclear. Statista puts Russia's arsenal at 5,997 nuclear warheads as of January 2022 in the U.S., with 5,428 nuclear warheads. According to the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Russia has a stockpile of around 4,477 weapons in its nuclear arsenal. In comparison, the U.S. has around 3,708 warheads. What will happen if Russia dropped a nuke on Europe? Before we take you through the video, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon to never miss a video from us. Vladimir Putin's threat of extreme violence in the face of possible NATO provocation has rightly raised the issue of the use of nuclear weapons, and it has come as a shock worldwide. There is still a mutual view that nuclear weapons are all about preserving a degree of stability through a balance of terror, that the weapons guarantee stability through mutually assured destruction. Many would argue that their existence over the past nearly 80 years has actually preserved peace. What has come as a shock is a possibility that Putin might use nuclear weapons if the Kremlin is unable to accomplish its aim of regime change in Kyiv by other means, precisely if NATO support for Ukraine is at the root of this failure. Concerns over Russian President Vladimir Putin's next move remain as Ukraine's counter-offensive moves on and Russia suffers severe setbacks. The possible use of nuclear weapons not entirely being off the table, Vladimir Putin does not seem to have many options left. Although the Russian military has been in failing since the war started, the likelihood still exists that Russia might use its nuclear arsenal in Ukraine in order to stop Western military support for Kyiv, and also to give Russia the psychological upper hand. What would happen if Russia dropped a nuke on Europe? Most likely it would be a strategic strike with a smaller nuclear missile. It can be assumed that the Russian scheming would result in Ukraine being forced to stop its military activity and have dialogues with Russia. Because of the terror of an escalating nuclear war, Russia might assume that the West would decline to support Ukraine militarily. The consequences are very hard to predict, but most likely they would be very unfavorable for Russia. To start with the possible nuke dropping, Russia's nuclear attack would not be seen as an insignia of strength, but rather as a sign of extreme weakness, as an ultimate, desperate move. As a matter of fact, NATO would feel forced to react to Russia's nuclear attack and establish an even more forceful posture against Russia. It is doubtful that Ukraine would suddenly stop protecting itself. Since the front line is very long and group concentrations are limited, a strategic nuclear strike would not accomplish much more than one can with conventional warfare, perhaps only instantly demobilizing one or two brigades. In addition, it would be very difficult to control the radiation fallout in the following days, leaving Russia's own troops and territory potentially exposed to nuclear radiation exposure. The international response against Russia would be strong and severe, especially as Russia's territory is not threatened. Perhaps the Russian seat in the UN Security Council would be challenged, and many countries which currently silently support Russia, such as China, might reconsider their position. Sanctions from the West would become even more rigid. More notably, the entire post-Second World War rulebook on the non-use of nuclear weapons would be discarded into the dustbin. For Ukraine and any other country neighboring Russia, the message would be clear. Russia is an existential threat, and if it does not get its way, it will use nuclear arms. The only rational response would be for the smaller neighboring countries to have easy access to similar response capacity and increased nuclear deterrence. European NATO members have internalized that they can depend on the United States military umbrella. However, the fact remains that since former President Donald Trump entered political life and China began taking an increased amount of American focus, Europeans have been concerned. The tipping point for the United States and Europe for the use of a nuclear response could be different. It should also be kept in mind that even during the Cold War, There were discussions on whether the U.S. would indeed be willing to risk the lives of millions of American citizens by protecting Europe with its own nuclear weapons. One could also argue that the more military capacity Europeans have, the better it is for NATO and transatlantic burden sharing. Consequently, the United States has continuously encouraged Europe to take more accountability for its security. Today, that war continues, and a potential nuclear strike by Russia remains an unfortunate possibility. For now, and for its future challenges, Europe must conclude to examine what the threat means for the continent's safekeeping, and what European countries must do for the betterment of their nuclear deterrence. While there are numerous rungs on the metaphorical escalation ladder before the nuclear would come into play, there are at least 3 distinct scenarios for Russia's use of a nuclear weapon, each of which differs in rationale and likely consequences. In the first scenario, Russia could test nuclear weapons as a warning to Ukraine and its supporters, demonstrating both its resolve and capability. Actions speak louder than words, so testing a nuclear weapon could drive home Russian President Vladimir Putin's past statements that this special military operation in Ukraine is becoming an existential conflict for the Russian state. The last Russian nuclear test occurred under the Soviet Union on October 24, 1990, and apart from North Korea, no state has conducted a nuclear test since 1998. Russia could conduct a nuclear demonstration in its northern regions, international waters, or an uninhabited part of Ukraine. Each of these options would, respectively, be more brazen in the extent to which they would depart from decades-old norms surrounding testing. Russia would likely take care to ensure that the test causes no casualties and yields minimal radioactive fallout. However, a nuclear demonstration would not tilt the balance in favor of either side. The efficacy of even Russia's most advanced nuclear weapons is likely already known to relevant Western governments, and a test likely would not motivate Ukraine to surrender because Kyiv already feels that the conflict is existential. Russia's recent aerial bombing campaigns have shown that a nuclear demonstration is likely to harden Kyiv's resolve and engender more sympathy and support from the West. One unwanted side effect could concern Russia's relations with China. China has tried to toe a careful line in maintaining the strong personal relationship between President Xi Jinping and Putin without kindling outright hostility from the West. China has thus far been sympathetic to Russia's broader strategic goals in Ukraine, but a Russian nuclear test could put Beijing in a tough position, as Xi Jinping recently stated China's opposition to any country using or threatening to use nuclear weapons. The second scenario can be that Russia could use nuclear weapons against the Ukrainian military or energy infrastructure targets in an attempt to weaken the country's will and damage its military capacity. Tactical nuclear weapons have a smaller payload and more precise targeting, which makes them conducive to battlefield use. Russia has about 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons that it could deploy by plane, missile, or ship. It would most likely use the short-range Iskander-M missile system. These weapons have yields of 1 to 50 kilotons, the largest of which would have a blast radius about half a kilometer wider than the bomb the U.S. military dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, at the end of World War II. Therefore, Russia's use of a tactical nuclear weapon against military targets on the battlefield would be unlikely to halt the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Even if a battlefield nuclear weapon made a land advance more challenging, Ukraine would likely continue its focus on aerial attacks and air defense in ways that have been successful in recent weeks. Moreover, using nuclear weapons on the battlefield would be less effective in shutting down Ukrainian electricity and energy infrastructure than conventional bombing, because their higher yield and lower accuracy makes them ill-suited for those targets. Russia would be cautious not to detonate weapons too close to its own soldiers or occupied territory. However, the West might not respond to tactical nuclear use by sending troops into Ukraine. But the United States and its allies would likely ramp up the number of conventional weapons they send to Ukraine. Western states would also be more willing to provide non-military humanitarian assistance in response to the fallout and radiation, which could also affect neighboring countries. The third scenario is Russia's most escalatory option and also the least likely to be used, which will be using a strategic nuclear weapon against Ukrainian civilian targets or Ukraine's neighboring international partners. Such an attack would be hundreds of times more powerful than one that used tactical weapons. Russia's aim would be to weaken Western resolve, and it would likely target military installations or infrastructure relevant to the Ukrainian war effort, such as arms supply lines in Poland or weapon storage facilities in the Baltics. Bombing a major Western city such as Paris or Los Angeles, by comparison, would only elicit a stronger Western reaction. This is also the scenario where a Western nuclear response is most likely. Using a nuclear weapon against civilian or non-Ukrainian targets would certainly generate a retaliatory response from Western states. The United States would be unlikely to default to nuclear weapons given its confidence in the demonstration of resolve that would result from a swift, sophisticated conventional response, which would also be tactically effective. Eastern European members of the NATO would be particularly interested in ensuring that the alliance mobilizes a response that sends a strong signal to Russia that nuclear use will never help it achieve expansionist objectives. What do you think? Will Russia shower Europe with nuclear or not? Will any of these scenarios be likely to come true? Let us know your views down in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for our upcoming videos. See you in the next episode.